My name is Willy. It is really a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. And I want to tell you about my work leading an organization called Omprakash, but this talk is not really about Omprakash. It's about a lot of the larger ideas and processes that have yielded this work over the last 13 years and my own learning journey through that. So the title of my talk is Why Doing Good is Never Enough, Reimagining Social Impact as Raising Consciousness. And I want to be somewhat provocative today and push everyone to rethink what we even mean when we talk about doing good. So I want to start with the assumption that everyone in this room and everyone at this conference wants to do good things in the world and have a positive impact. And I think that is worth acknowledging and validating, and there's no need to be cynical about that. There are good reasons to question it, but we don't need to be cynical. It's great that we all want to do good things in the world. But of course, the hard question is, what does that actually mean? Who defines doing good, and whose definition counts? And it's one thing to say, oh, well, good intentions are not enough. That's pretty routine and cliches in these settings by now. What I want to say today is a bit more provocative. It's not just that our efforts to do good are sometimes ineffective and they don't go as far as we think they do or we hope they do. It's actually that sometimes our efforts to do good and programs that are designed to do good end up reinforcing the actual problems that they're hoping to solve, even if they're producing measurable impacts in some other ways. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about has to do with how we think about impact and measurement. And the key point here is that I think all of us in the higher ed space and the sort of Ashoka, social impact, social innovation kind of space, we are surrounded by buzzwords. We are swimming through buzzwords every day about impact and change and transformation and so on. And my concern is that sometimes that has led to a sort of context where there's so much focus on the measurable impact that it can actually distract us from the deeper pedagogical implications of our program structures. By that, what I mean is we'll design some program that achieves some measurable impact, but the harder to measure impact is that what our students are learning, or not only students, but what everyone who participates is learning, is maybe reinforcing some problematic assumptions. That's kind of the larger outline of what I want to talk about. And I want to start by just telling you a bit about my own story. So this is a story about Omprakash, which is both the name of a person and the name of the organization that I founded when I was 18 years old, and that continues to be sort of the focus of my life. And so basically the story began, I was in high school, I wanted to find an opportunity to volunteer abroad, and I was very frustrated. Probably some of you have encountered this, but if I searched online for volunteer in India, everything that came up was this highly commodified, prepackaged trip model being sold by a middleman or a placement organization. And that was very frustrating to me. I knew I didn't want that. Fast forward a bit, I found an opportunity to go to India, not through any kind of middleman organization. I taught English for 3 months. I had a very eye-opening experience in many ways. I met a guy named Omprakash who inspired me. Very simple idea. Start a website connecting people directly to organizations. Nothing is for sale. There's no placements. This is about connecting people with organizations and building relationships. So I did that. I started this little website. I went to college. No one was making money. This was just kind of a side project. This network started to grow. At first, we had just a few partner organizations in India. Today, it's 182 organizations in 41 countries. But as this network was growing, and I looked around this kind of space that all of a sudden we were in, I became more and more concerned. Because the broader context here, and again, I think most of you are familiar with this space, is there's a sort of booming industry around selling prepackaged trips, like the one you see there, $2,000 for 9 days. And these trips are sold on the premise of making impact, changing the world, doing good, whatever. And what was so concerning to me was, and to many others in this space, I don't claim to be the first one making this argument, but is that beneath the surface of a lot of these kinds of shiny trips, there are some deep ethical concerns, and almost even more concerning is, I say they're pedagogically bankrupt, which is to say no one is thinking about what sorts of learning, what kinds of assumptions about the world are we reinforcing through this kind of program. And essentially what that has meant, that brings us to today. And when the work of Omprakash has changed over the years. We still connect people with organizations around the world, and we're really proud to do so in a way that is I would say, uncommodified, and we're trying to move away from this kind of selling a trip and saying we want people to connect directly with organizations, build a real relationship, and the key point is our partner organizations have the power to say no. They're not just some passive beneficiary. You have to apply to work with them, and they can say no. Just like you're applying for an internship in Boston. But the fact is, about 6 years ago, as this work was continuing and our network was growing, I started to really worry, we are not doing enough to actually confront the problematic assumptions that a lot of students are bringing into this. So no matter how many volunteers we're connecting and how many good things they might appear to be doing, if we're not actually grappling with their inherited assumptions about the world and their roles within the world, and we can talk about paternalism and neocolonial assumptions and savior complexes, but if we're not grappling with that stuff, we are not doing enough. So my colleagues and I started a whole new element of Omprakash, which is called Omprakash Edge. And it's an online learning program designed to help students reflect more critically on what it is that they're actually doing, what we actually mean when we talk about impact, and designed to radically decondition them of some of these assumptions. So this brings me to this question of impact, because when people ask me about the impact of Omprakash, I can easily say, oh, well, we have 183 partners in 41 countries, thousands of volunteers. Our partners have raised millions of dollars. We partner with 15 universities now offering accredited programs to students. I can give you all these numbers. But at the end of the day, the reality is none of those numbers get towards the deeper question that matters most to me and my colleagues, which is to what extent are we actually changing the way that people think about the world? To what extent are we really disrupting these embedded assumptions that are really our biggest concern? So enough about Omprakash. I want to start now talking about some of the bigger points here. The first is about this idea of measuring impact. Measuring impact can be a trap. It's easy to talk about how many people we've served, but obviously the bigger questions are, well, what does that actually mean? What are we serving them? And what is the quality of that? So I want to give two quick examples of this. Again, if we could change the color, that would help people see a little better. But so how many? I'm sure everyone here has heard someone say, "Oh, give money to this project to build a school or to send a kid to school, and schooling creates empowerment," and so on. Well, it turns out over the last several decades, this is showing just total absolute numbers of school enrollment in the last century. It has skyrocketed. More and more kids are going to school. Schools are being built around the world. Needless to say, you don't need to be an education researcher to figure out that the number of kids going to school doesn't actually tell us anything about the quality of schooling, the quality of teachers, what they're actually learning, nor does it tell us about whether the social conditions exist to create this thing we call empowerment. So this is a classic case of, oh, it's easy to measure how many people are in school. That tells us nothing about the bigger changes we're trying to achieve. Another great example is toilets. People in the public health world have thought for a long time, oh, if we build more toilets, especially in places where open defecation is a problem, we're going to achieve all this stuff. So in the 1990s, the government in India built tons of toilets in rural areas. And it's only recently that public health researchers have conclusively demonstrated they have not reduced the disease burden in any significant way because a lot of toilets aren't being used for the purposes they were built for. So there's a saying here that I really like, which is because it's hard to measure what we care about, we often end up caring about what we can measure. And that is a huge trap that drives programs from the university level, whether that's in the volunteering space or innovation, internships, it's across the board. So what this really gets towards is a larger distinction between social service and social change. And most of us have probably heard of this distinction before, but the basic idea is social services address an immediate problem. You give food to people who are hungry, you give a home to people who don't have a home. And social change is talking about getting towards the roots of a problem. Asking why are people hungry? How can we actually address that? And my point is not that social services shouldn't exist or that we should get rid of homeless shelters or whatever, but we need to know the difference. And my concern here is that very often this rush to measure impact and brag about our impact is leading people to focus more on those surface level social services provided, billions of people served or whatever, and not to ask the big, harder questions about social change. Now I want to pause and just point out, some might say, hey, Willy, you're pretty cynical. Sure, when students go abroad and do some little thing, they're not changing the world forever, but at least they're making a difference to this one. We all know that starfish story. The guy's on the beach, there's all the starfish, throws it back in. Hey, at least it matters to this one. Okay, maybe. But this is my bigger concern. If that guy on the beach goes home and pats himself on the back and actually is less concerned now about all those starfish because he knows he made a difference to that one, then arguably he has actually made the problem worse. Or this whole narrative of, hey, at least you helped that one, a little bit of help is better than nothing. I get it, but also I worry that can actually make us complacent. It can reinforce and distract from the deeper problems. So here's a good example. Some of you may have heard of this, the socket ball, classic thing. This is I don't want to be too cynical, but I kind of think this is the kind of project that would get a lot of buzz at a conference like this. It's a soccer ball that creates electricity, and just check it out. CNN, Oprah, Obama, Ted, Clinton, people are saying, this is amazing, this is amazing. Now, it turns out the soccer ball didn't really work, a lot of them broke. There was the whole issue of what if I don't want to play soccer and I just want to be able to charge my phone without playing soccer? But aside from that, honestly, that's not even my critique. That's an easy critique. My bigger critique is this. There is nothing about that product that addresses the fundamental question of why is it that today, in 2018, as we sit in this nice hotel and so on and so forth, there are many, many people in the world who don't have electricity. That is a larger question about government and NGOs and the grid and natural resource extraction and all these bigger factors. And this product not only doesn't really address that, it doesn't even invite us to think about it. So again, the pedagogical implications, the sort of learning trajectory that this sets us on is ineffective. It doesn't bring us any closer to thinking about the core issue. Let me now give an example of the same point, but as it actually manifests with university students. So we're going to play a little game called Buzzword Bingo. There's a lot of buzzwords in this space. We're going to try to call some out. So check this out. What you see at left, again, it's a shame you can't actually see it, but there's a photo here. And this is a direct excerpt from a university alumni magazine. Okay, we've all seen these magazines. The university marketing department or whatever puts it out to try to get alumni to give money and so on. And there's a photo here of a bunch of students from this American university in Latin America in front of a construction site. And the headline, students build a home for a Nicaraguan family. And check it out. They have solutions. They're sustainable solutions. They're doing development. They're in an underdeveloped community. They use the term socially responsible and sustainable architecture. So it's like, wow, this is great. And someone could say, okay, sure, these students didn't solve the problem of housing crises in Nicaragua, but they made an impact. That was good. But this is my concern. Check out what one student was quoted in the alumni magazine. The university's bragging about this. This is what this student learned on this trip. I learned that going down to Central America to help build a home doesn't require any high-level thinking. It just requires the desire and the will to help someone out. So my point here is that, sure, maybe building the home is nice. It's better than not having a home. We could sort of ask, why do we need students from the US to travel to Central America to build a home? But that's not even the point. The point is, if that experience, if the sort of invisible outcome of that experience is students come home and they say, great, I learned that, all you need to do is be a nice person and the world will get better, I think we have done a disservice to our students and to the world, no matter how many measurable impacts might emerge from that project. So what I'm really getting at here is that social change and bigger social impacts that we're striving for have to emerge from raising consciousness, changing the way people think about their world and their own involvement in the world's injustices and inequalities and the way the world actually looks today. So here I'm drawing a lot of inspiration from Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator that some of you may be familiar with, who said, raising consciousness is a matter of learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and to take action against oppressive elements of reality. So coming back to Omprakash, the point here is that we still connect people with volunteer opportunities around the world, but we also have this entire online learning ecosystem where we are really trying to push students to do this. And they go abroad and we say your role is not to help, but it is to gain a deep understanding of the root causes of a given social issue. And here's the interesting thing. That can be a deeply unsatisfying process. And students come home and they don't say, oh, it was so great, I had such an impact. They come home and they say, yeah, I was working in this school and I was trying to think about what's going on in that school, and that led me to question the national education policy, and that actually led me to question the entire international education policy and the role of the World Bank and the IMF, and it's really complicated. And that is a much harder thing to come home with than coming home saying, it was so great. I taught in this school and I helped these kids. And I know I didn't solve I didn't save the education crisis, but at least I made a difference to this one. But what I want to end with today is the basic point that that feeling of, am I doing enough? That sense of being unsettled and uncertain, that is actually one of the best impacts we can strive for. That is going beyond. If our students are coming out of programs and not just saying, look how many homes I built, or look at our sexy impact, but they're saying, I am deeply unsettled and unsure about why the world looks the way it does, and I want to understand it more, and having that sense of questioning, to me, that is one of the best outcomes we can go for. And so I want to end with a little bit of a joke, but I think there's some deeper points here. We all have heard that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But no one really talks about what the road to heaven is paved with. So I will submit. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. This is another key point, though. So the fact is, our students, that was part of the joke. That was part of the joke. No, the fact is, students are saying, this doesn't feel that good. And if Omprakash was driven by a desire to just give students what they want, we would be another company selling feel-good, short-term group volunteerism trips. And we're not. And so this kind of runs against a lot of the logic of design thinking and user-centered design. But frankly, in our experience, the customer is not always right. We have had to have the courage to say, we're going to build a program that doesn't give students what they want, and that pushes students to ask really hard questions. If we gave students what they want, they would not be required to do significant pre-departure reflection and training and so on. No one wants extra homework. But we are pushing back and saying, hey, the customer is not always right. We don't just want to give people this kind of experience. Okay? We want to push them to really be thinking hard. And so again, the road to hell, paved with good intentions. The road to heaven, I will submit, is paved with critical consciousness. And all along the way, there are signs asking, what the hell is heaven anyway? And my point here is not to make a comment. This is not a theological comment. This is basically a way of saying that wherever it is you're trying to go, you need to be consistently asking, what are we really doing here? What is really going on here? And as soon as you say, oh no, we've got our impact, we're just there, we're so proud of ourselves, that's when I start to worry. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.